She smoothed the sleeve of her simple navy dress, the one she'd chosen not for glamour, but because it reminded her of the sea near her grandmother's house, the place where she first learned to pray. 5 years of marriage to Marcus Whitmore, tech entrepreneur, Forbes cover star, man who never missed a quarterly earnings call, and never remembered her favorite tea. Clara, his voice cut through her thoughts, crisp and distracted, like he was already halfway out the door. He stood by the closet, adjusting his cufflinks without looking at her. "You're wearing that to the gala," she didn't flinch. "Not anymore. It's modest, elegant, and it's clean." He sighed, finally glancing her way, but his eyes skimmed over her like she was part of the furniture. "Just try to keep up tonight, all right? The Vanderbilts will be there. And Thorne." "Elias Thorne?" she asked softly, more to herself than to him. She'd read about him, billionaire investor, yes, but also the quiet force behind clean water initiatives in East Africa and shelters for displaced families. A man who gave without fanfare. Marcus snorted. "Don't get starry-eyed. He's not here for charity speeches. He's here to make deals. And I need him to see me. Not my wife daydreaming by the window." The words landed like stones in her chest. But Clara didn't cry. She hadn't cried in months. Instead, she reached into her small clutch and touched the worn edge of a laminated verse her grandmother had tucked into her suitcase on her wedding day. "I have called you by name. You are mine." Isaiah 431. She whispered it now, barely audible. "You are mine." Marcus was already heading for the elevator, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders to his assistant. "Tell them the merger hinges on tonight. No room for error." Clara stood, straightened her shoulders, and followed. Not because she wanted to be seen beside him, but because she still believed in vows, in grace, in the stubborn hope that love could be rebuilt, even when it felt like dust. As the elevator descended, she caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Pale cheeks, tired eyes, but a quiet strength in her gaze that no gala could dim. She wasn't Marcus's accessory. She wasn't invisible. And tonight, whether he noticed or not, she would walk into that ballroom as Clara Whitmore, daughter of God, keeper of dreams, and a woman who still dared to believe that being seen by heaven mattered more than being seen by men. But even as she clung to that truth, a tremor of longing flickered deep within. What if someone actually looked at me and really saw me? The car ride to the gala was silent. Marcus typed furiously on his tablet. Clara watched the city blur past, streetlights streaking like falling stars. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed 8 times, soft, solemn, as if reminding her you are not alone. And for the first time in a long while, she almost believed it. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller disinvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada topico que for disinvolve. Mi conti sobrio topico tu com dialogo como su fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de disinvolver com vida moco. Com muitos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters quen 3, max. The city glittered like a crown of diamonds. Beneath the velvet sky, and the Grand Ainsworth Hotel rose at its heart. A temple of marble, champagne flutes, and whispered power. Inside, the gala unfolded like a meticulously choreographed dream. Women in gowns that cost more than most people's annual rent. Men in tuxedos sharp enough to cut through silence. Laughter that never quite reached the eyes. This was Marcus Whitmore's world. The one he'd clawed his way into, polished with relentless ambition, and now guarded like sacred ground. But for Clara, stepping into that ballroom felt less like arrival and more like exile. She followed Marcus through the grand archway, her hand lightly resting on his arm. Not because he offered it, but because protocol demanded it. He gave a practiced nod to the hostess, flashed a smile that didn't touch his soul, and immediately scanned the room for faces that mattered: investors, influencers, gatekeepers of the next big thing. Clara's fingers tightened slightly on his sleeve, not out of affection, but to anchor herself against the tide of invisibility already pulling at her. "Ah, Marcus, there you are," boomed a voice from across the room. Richard Langston, CEO of Viridian Capital, clapped Marcus on the shoulder with a grin that showed too many teeth. And this must be... His eyes flickered toward Clara, polite but disinterested, like she was part of the decor. My wife, Marcus said quickly, already turning back to Richard. Clara, why don't you get us some drinks the usual? It wasn't a request. It was a dismissal. She nodded, throat tight, and walked toward the bar, heels clicking softly against the inlaid floor. Around her, conversations swirled. Deals disguised as pleasantries, alliances forged over canapes, reputations traded like currency. She heard snippets, his stocks plummeting. She only got the board seat because of her father. Did you see what Thorne backed last quarter? Pure genius. No one spoke of kindness. No one mentioned faith or forgiveness, or the quiet courage it took to love someone who barely looked at you. At the bar, she ordered 2 glasses of sparkling water with lime. Marcus hated alcohol before negotiations. It clouded his edge. As she waited, a woman in emerald silk sidled up beside her, perfume thick as regret. You're Clara Whitmore, aren't you? The woman asked, not unkindly, but with the curiosity one might give a rare bird in a cage. I've seen your name on charity galas. You run that literacy program, right? Clara blinked, surprised. Yes, Pages of Hope. We place books in underserved schools. The woman smiled, genuine for a moment. That's beautiful. My daughter benefited from it last year. She reads now, really reads. Thank you. Tears pricked Clara's eyes. Not from praise, but from the shock of being known. Not as Marcus's wife, but as herself. You're welcome, she whispered. It's what I believe I'm meant to do. But before she could say more, Marcus appeared at her elbow, glass in hand, expression cool. There you are. Langston's introducing me to Thorne in 5 minutes. Stay near the terrace. Don't wander. The woman in emerald gave Clara an apologetic glance and melted back into the crowd. Alone again, Clara stepped onto the terrace, where the night air was cooler, softer. Below, the city hummed, a living thing vast and indifferent. She leaned against the stone railing, clutching her glass like a lifeline. This world, of private jets, penthouse views, and curated perfection, had never been hers. She'd entered it willingly, believing love would bridge the gap. But over time, the chasm had widened. Marcus saw success as accumulation, wealth, influence, control. Clara saw it as stewardship, compassion, service, presence. She remembered their early days. Modest apartment, shared ramen dinners, Marcus holding her hand during thunderstorms. Back then, he'd listened when she spoke about her dreams. Now, her voice seemed to dissolve before it reached him. A soft rustle behind her. She turned, expecting a server. Instead, it was an older man in a tailored but understated tuxedo, silver threading his temples, eyes calm as still water. He held 2 glasses of water just like hers. I hope I'm not intruding, he said gently. I saw you step out. The noise inside can be overwhelming. Clara hesitated, then shook her head. No, it's peaceful out here. He offered her a glass. Elias Thorne, he said simply. Her breath caught. The Elias Thorne, the man whose name opened boardrooms and closed poverty gaps alike. I know who you are, she admitted softly. You funded the new community center in Camden. My team partners with them. A flicker of warmth lit his eyes. Then I owe you thanks. Those children deserve more than buildings, they deserve champions. Like you. She looked down, stunned. No flattery, no agenda, just recognition. Inside, the orchestra swelled into a waltz. Laughter drifted through the French doors. But out, you remember Camden, she asked, voice barely above the rustle of wind through the ivy-covered trellis. I remember a little girl named Marisol, Elias said, gazing out over the city lights. She couldn't read her own name when we broke ground. Last month, she read me a poem she wrote about stars. He turned to Clara, eyes soft with reverence. That's not my doing. That's yours. Clara's breath hitched. No one had ever credited her like that, not truly. Marcus praised her only when her charity work boosted his public image. But this felt like grace. Inside, the music swelled. A waltz, elegant and yearning. A burst of laughter echoed from the ballroom, sharp and fleeting. Clara glanced back, half expecting to see Marcus searching for her. But the doors remained closed. He hadn't noticed she was gone. "He doesn't see you, does he?" Elias said gently, not unkindly, just stating a truth that hung between them like mist. She didn't answer at first. How could she admit that the man who vowed to love her had reduced her to a shadow in his own life, that she sometimes woke in the night wondering if she disappeared entirely and no one had told her, "I pray every morning," she finally whispered, eyes fixed on the skyline, that God would remind Marcus what love really is. Not performance, not convenience, but presence. Elias was silent for a long moment. Then, "You still believe in him?" "I believe in the man he could be," she corrected, voice trembling. "And I believe God hasn't given up on us." A faint smile touched Elias's lips. "Faith like that is rare, dangerous even. The world doesn't reward waiting. It rewards taking. But God rewards faithfulness," she said, almost to herself. He studied her then, not with the calculating gaze of a billionaire assessing risk, but with the tenderness of someone who'd known loss, who'd knelt in silence before a throne higher than any boardroom. "You carry a heavy burden, Clara Whitmore." She looked at him, surprised he'd used her full name. "I chose it." "Did you?" His question wasn't challenging, just curious, like he was tracing the outline of her soul. "Or did you inherit it from a dream you thought was love?" Her chest tightened. She wanted to defend Marcus, but the truth pressed against her ribs like a caged bird. Before she could answer, the terrace doors opened. Marcus stood there, tuxedo immaculate, jaw set, eyes narrowed. His gaze flicked from Clara to Elias, then back again, cold, unreadable. "There you are," he said, voice clipped. "Thorn, I didn't realize you'd stepped out. Langston's been looking for you." Elias nodded calmly, just catching a breath. "Your wife has a remarkable mind, Marcus. You should listen to her more often." The words weren't sharp, but they landed like a blade between ribs. Marcus stiffened. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. "I'll take her from here," Marcus said, stepping forward, hand outstretched. Not to Clara, but toward Elias, as if reclaiming property. But Clara didn't move. She looked at her husband, really looked, and saw not anger, but fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of being less than. Fear that someone had seen what he'd ignored for years, that his wife was more than an accessory. She was a light. "I'll be in shortly," she said quietly, not defiant but firm. Marcus hesitated. For the first time in years, he seemed unsure. He opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to apologize, but then closed it. With a curt nod to Elias, he turned and disappeared back into the glittering crowd. Silence returned, heavier now. "You didn't have to do that," Clara said to Elias, voice thick. "I didn't do anything," he replied. "I simply spoke what was already true." She swallowed hard. "What happens now?" He handed her a small card. Plain, no logo, just a phone number and an email. "My assistant coordinates partnerships with faith-based initiatives. If you ever want to scale pages of hope beyond the city, we'd be honored to help." "No strings?" she asked, wary. "Only one," he said, meeting her eyes. "You keep pointing those children to hope. Not just books, hope. The kind that changes generations." She took the card. It felt warm in her palm, like a promise. Inside, the music shifted, slower now, more intimate. A new dance began. Elias stepped back. "Go," he said softly. "Your story isn't with me, still with him. But you must decide, will you wait in silence, or will you speak your truth? Even if it shakes the ground beneath you." Clara looked toward the doors, heart pounding. She didn't know what awaited her inside. Cold shoulders, sharp words, or perhaps, just perhaps, the first crack in a damn long os arched only for one man. Marcus stood near the grand staircase, glass in hand, posture rigid. He wasn't talking to anyone, just watching the crowd watching her. She walked toward him, not with the hesitant steps of a woman afraid of her husband's temper, but with the quiet resolve of someone who had just remembered her own name. He didn't speak as she approached, didn't offer his arm, just stared, jaw working, as if trying to decipher a language he'd never learned. "You spoke to Thorn," he finally said. Not a question, an accusation wrapped in ice. "I did," she replied, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He asked about pages of hope. He remembered Marisol. Marcus scoffed, but it lacked conviction. Of course he did. He's building a reputation. You think he cares about some kid in Camden? "I think he sees people," Clara said softly, "even when they're standing right in front of him." The words landed like a stone in still water. Marcus flinched just slightly, but she saw it. Saw the flicker of shame beneath the pride. He turned away, staring into his glass as if it held answers. "You don't understand how this world works, Clara. Everything here is leverage. Every handshake, every smile, it's all calculated. Thorn didn't talk to you out of kindness. He's probing, testing weaknesses. Is that how you see love too?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. As leverage, he went very still. Around them, the gala continued. Laughter, clinking glasses, the rustle of silk. But between them, time seemed to hold its breath. "I provide for you," Marcus said at last, voice low, almost pleading. "A home, security, everything you ever needed." "But not me," she whispered. "You never asked what I needed." He finally looked at her, eyes shadowed, raw. "What do you want, Clara? Tell me. Name it. A new car, a villa in Tuscany, a seat on a board, just say it." She shook her head, tears welling but not falling. "I wanted you to ask how my day was. To remember I hate lilies because they remind me of my mother's funeral. To hold my hand when we walk in. Not because the cameras are rolling, but because you miss me." His breath caught. I didn't know those things mattered." "They are the things that matter," she said, voice breaking. "Without them, what are we, two strangers sharing a roof and a bank account?" Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid over 5 long years. Then, from across the room, a voice cut through the tension. "Whitmore, there you are." Richard Langston approached, flanked by 2 associates, all smiles and sharp suits. "Thorn's ready to talk terms. He's impressed. Says your wife's initiative has exceptional ROI in human capital." He chuckled, clapping Marcus on the back. Who knew marrying a do-gooder would pay off? Clara's stomach dropped. They were reducing her life's work to a talking point, a bargaining chip in Marcus's game. But before Marcus could respond, Clara spoke. Clear, calm, undeniable. "Pages of Hope isn't for sale, Mr. Langston. And it's not a strategy. It's a calling." Langston blinked, taken aback. "Well, of course. Just admiring your passion, Mrs. Whitmore." Marcus stared at her, stunned. He'd never heard her speak like that in public. So sure, so unafraid. As Langston retreated, muttering about fire in the quiet ones, Marcus turned to Clara, voice barely audible. "Since when did you become this?" "Since I stopped waiting for you to notice I was drowning," she said gently, "and started remembering I could swim." He looked away, fingers tightening around his glass. For the first time, the mask cracked. Not into anger, but into something far more dangerous, regret. "I thought I was protecting you," he murmured, "from the mess of my world, from the pressure." "Love doesn't protect by shutting someone out," she said. "It protects by holding on, especially when things get messy." He was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he set his glass down on a passing tray. "Dance with me." She blinked. "What? The music's still playing," he said, offering his hand. This time, not as a formality, but as a plea. "Just one dance. No cameras. No deals. Just us." Her heart hammered. Was this real or another performance? But then she saw it. The faintest sheen in his eyes, the tremor in his outstretched hand. Not the billionaire. Not the CEO. Just Marcus. The man who once held her through a thunderstorm and whispered, "I've got you." She placed her hand in his. As they stepped onto the floor, the world blurred around them. He held her closer than he had in years, his breath uneven against her hair. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, voice rough, "but I want to learn." She closed her eyes, letting the music carry them. "Then start by listening," she whispered. Really listening. And for the first time in a long time, he did. But even as they swayed beneath the glittering lights, a quiet dread curled in Clara's chest, because she knew this moment was fragile. Beautiful, yes, but fragile. And outside the ballroom, the real world waited Marcus's crumbling deals, his pride, the weight of habits forged over years. Would this dance be the beginning of restoration? Or just one last, fleeting glimpse of what could have been she didn't know? Then his phone buzzed. He didn't reach for it immediately. For 3 heartbeats, he just stood there, eyes locked on hers, as if choosing, really choosing, between the world in his pocket and the woman in front of him. But old habits are heavy things. With a sigh that sounded like surrender, he pulled the device from his jacket. One glance and his face went pale. "What is it?" Clara asked, already bracing herself. He didn't answer, just stared at the screen like it had delivered a death sentence. Then, voice hollow, "It's over. Marcus." The Singapore deal just collapsed. Their board backed out. Without that capital. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes wild. "I'm leveraged to the bone, Clara. If I can't secure new backing by Monday, Whitmore Dynamics defaults. Everything, the penthouse, the foundation, even your literacy program, it all gets liquidated." Her breath caught. Not for the loss of luxury, she'd never cared for it, but for the children who depended on pages of hope, for the staff who'd trusted Marcus's vision, for the life they'd built, however fractured. "Who can help?" she asked, mind racing. His jaw tightened. Only one person with that kind of liquidity and influence on short notice. Elias Thorne. The name hung between them, unspoken but deafening. Marcus looked away, shame burning in his cheeks. He'll want concessions, control, maybe even a seat on the board. And after tonight, he swallowed hard, after how I've treated you, he'll have every reason to say no. Clara's heart pounded. This was the test. Not just of Marcus's pride, but of everything that had shifted between them in that single dance. She reached for his hand. He flinched, expecting rejection, but she held on. "Then we go to him," she said firmly. "Together." He stared at her. "You'd stand beside me after everything." "I stand beside the man you're trying to become," she said softly. "Not the one you've been." He didn't cry, but his eyes shimmered raw, exposed, human. They found Elias on the balcony overlooking the hotel's inner garden, standing alone beneath a canopy of string lights, hands clasped behind his back as if in prayer. He turned as they approached, expression unreadable. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus began, voice strained. "I know this is unprecedented, but I need to speak with you, privately." Elias glanced at Clara, then back at Marcus. "She stays." Marcus blinked. She's part of this," Elias said gently but firmly. "Not as your wife, as the heart of what you're truly worth saving." Silence. Then Marcus nodded, humbled. "You're right." They stepped closer, the city's distant hum a quiet witness. "I've lost the Singapore backing," Marcus said, no pretense now, no spin. "Without immediate capital injection, I default Monday morning. I'll lose everything, including the programs Clara built." Elias didn't react, just studied him. "Why should I help you? Marcus, you've built an empire on appearances. You've ignored the woman who carries your name like a crown of thorns." "What's changed?" Marcus looked at Clara, then back at Elias. "I finally saw her," he said, voice breaking. "Not as an asset, not as a shadow, but as my wife. And I realized I've been bankrupt in the one thing that matters, love." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "Then love isn't a feeling. It's a choice. A daily surrender." "I'm choosing it now," Marcus said. "Even if it costs me everything." Elias turned to Clara. "And do you believe him?" She met his gaze. Tears in her eyes but resolve in her spine. "I believe in redemption. And I believe God brought us here, for this moment." Elias exhaled slowly, as if releasing a burden. "I won't invest in your company, Marcus." Clara's heart sank. "But," Elias continued, "I will fund Pages of Hope, independently, fully, immediately, with no strings. It will be Clara's alone to lead. As for you," he paused, "I'll give you 48 hours. Marcus frowned. "For what?" "To prove you're serious. Meet me Monday morning, not at my office but at the Camden Community Center. Be there by 7. Bring your hands, not your resume. If you're willing to serve, without cameras, without credit, then we'll talk about partnership. Not as investor and CEO, but as men who've learned that true wealth is measured in humility." Marcus swallowed hard. "And if I don't show, then Clara moves forward without you," Elias said simply. "And you'll have to live with the man you chose to remain." The words hung in the air, heavy as judgment, tender as grace. Clara squeezed Marcus's hand. He didn't pull away. As they walked back inside, the gala now winding down, guests drifting toward exits and waiting cars, Clara felt a strange peace settle over her. Not because the storm had passed, but because, for the first time, they were facing it together. But as Marcus hailed their car, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, and his face went white. "What is it?" she whispered. He showed her the message. A single line from an unknown number. "I know what really happened in Singapore. And I'm not the only one." Her blood ran cold. Because the city lights streaked past like falling stars, beautiful but distant. Inside, the air crackled with unspoken fear. Marcus stared at his phone, fingers hovering over the message, as if deleting it might erase the threat. But Clara saw the truth in his eyes. This wasn't just a rumor. It was a reckoning. "Who sent that?" she finally asked, voice low. He didn't look at her. "I don't know. But what really happened in Singapore?" He trailed off, jaw clenched. "There were irregularities in the due diligence. Nothing illegal, just optimistic projections. I thought I could fix it before closing." "Optimistic," she whispered. "Marcus, that's not optimism. That's deception." He flinched. "I was trying to save us. The company, the jobs, your program." At what cost? Her voice broke. "If the truth comes out, it won't just be your reputation. It'll be every child who trusted Pages of Hope, every donor who believed in us. You built a house on sand, and now the tide's coming in." He turned to her then, eyes desperate. "So what do I do? Confess and lose everything, or fight to protect what we've built? Even if it means bending the truth a little longer." She looked out the window, tears blurring the city into streaks of gold and shadow. "You don't get to choose between truth and survival, Marcus. Truth is survival. Without it, we're already lost." He was silent for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost missed it, "I'm scared, Clara. Not the CEO. Not the billionaire. Just a man. Terrified of becoming the very thing he swore he'd never be, his father. A man who lied his way to the top and died alone, despised even by his own family." She reached for his hand. This time, he gripped it like a lifeline. When they arrived home, the penthouse felt colder than usual. No staff waited in the foyer. Marcus had dismissed them for the night. For once, there were no cameras, no assistants, no curated perfection. Just two people standing in the wreckage of their choices. He poured 2 glasses of water, no whiskey, no pretense, and handed her one. "I should call my lawyer," he said, more to himself than to her. "No," Clara said firmly. "Call your pastor." He stared at her. "My what? You used to go to that men's Bible study at Grace Chapel. Before the IPO. Before you said faith was bad for optics." She stepped closer. "If you're going to face this, face it on your knees. Not in a boardroom." He laughed, a dry, broken sound. "And what if God doesn't answer? Then you'll know you weren't really asking," she said gently. "But if you are, he's already there." He sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. "What if I've gone too far? Clara, what if there's no coming back from this? She knelt in front of him, took his face in her hands, something she hadn't done in years, and looked straight into his soul. Remember when we got married, you told me, I'll never let pride come between us. Her voice trembled. You didn't mean to break that promise, but you did. And now, you get to choose, will you let fear keep you in the dark, or will you step into the light? Even if it burns, he closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down his cheek. I don't know how to be that man again, he whispered. You don't have to be, she said. You just have to let God rebuild you, one honest word at a time. He pulled her into his arms then, not with the confidence of a husband who had everything, but with the trembling need of a man who had finally realized he had nothing and everything to gain. They stayed like that for a long time, the city humming below, the threat still looming, the clock ticking toward Monday's deadline. But in that quiet, sacred space, something shifted. Not because the danger had passed, but because, for the first time, they weren't facing it alone. And somewhere, in the stillness between heartbeats, Clara felt it, the quiet whisper of grace, stitching together what pride had torn apart. But as they rose to go to bed, Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time, a photo. Marcus hadn't slept. She'd heard him pacing the study all night, voice low on calls she wasn't meant to hear. Pleas, negotiations, the brittle edge of a man trying to outrun his own shadow. But when he finally emerged, his eyes were hollow. His shoulders slumped, not with defeat, but with something far more dangerous: resignation. He wants $5 million, Marcus said, voice rough. Cash, untraceable. Or he leaks the photo to the press by noon Monday. Clara turned slowly. Who is he? A junior analyst from the Singapore team. I cut him out of the final bonus pool when the deal looked shaky. Said it was performance-based. He let out a bitter laugh. Turns out, his performance included documenting every lie I told. She stepped toward him, heart pounding. You can't pay him, Marcus. I don't have a choice, he snapped, then immediately winced, running a hand over his face. I'm sorry. I can't lose everything. Not now. Not after last night. Last night changed nothing if you go back to hiding, she said firmly. Paying him isn't protection. It's another lie, and it'll never end. He'll keep coming back, and you'll keep paying, until there's nothing left of you but debt and secrets. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. Then what do you suggest I walk into that press conference Monday and say, by the way, I misled investors, my company collapses. Employees lose jobs. Your program shuts down. Is that the truth you want? No, she said, kneeling before him, voice trembling but clear. I want the truth that sets us free, not the one that destroys us. There's a difference. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. How? Go to Elias. Not for money. For counsel. He's walked this path. He's turned down deals that compromised his integrity. He'll know what to do. Marcus shook his head. He'll think I'm weak. Or he'll see you as brave, Clara whispered. Bravery isn't never falling, Marcus. It's choosing to stand up when you're already on your knees. He was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, what if he walks away? Then we rebuild from nothing, she said. Together, with clean hands. He stared at her, really looked, and for the first time, she saw not the man who built an empire, but the boy who once held her hand during a thunderstorm and promised, I'll always protect you. But protection wasn't control. It was sacrifice. He reached for her hand. Will you come with me to Camden Monday morning? Of course, she said, but not as your wife trying to fix you, as your partner walking the same path. He nodded, tears welling. I don't deserve you. No, she said gently. You don't. But grace isn't about deserving. It's about receiving and giving and showing up, even when you're terrified. Later that morning, as rain began to fall over the city, Marcus made a call. Not to his lawyer, not to his PR team, but to the pastor of Grace Chapel. His voice was quiet, halting, but steady. I need to confess something, he said. Not for damage control, for healing. Clara stood in the doorway, listening, heartbreaking and mending all at once. After he hung up, he turned to her, eyes red but clear. I'm going to the community center early. Tonight. To clean. To serve. Before anyone sees me. Before anyone judges me. She smiled through tears. Then I'll be there too. But as they prepared to leave, Marcus's phone buzzed one last time. A new message. No photo this time. Just a name, Rebecca Lynn. And beneath it, she's testifying Monday. She has the emails. Clara's blood ran cold. Rebecca Lynn, the lead compliance officer in Singapore. Quiet, meticulous, deeply principled. If she had the internal emails, they proved Marcus knowingly misrepresented financial projections. This wasn't blackmail anymore. This was justice. And it was coming whether they were ready or not. Marcus looked at Clara, fear and resolve warring in his eyes. If I go to Camden now, and she testifies, it'll look like I'm running. Or like you're finally standing, Clara said. Let them see who you're becoming, not who you were. He took a deep breath, then nodded. As they stepped into the elevator, the city falling away below, Clara clutched her grandmother's verse in her pocket. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Clara stepped out first, pulling her coat tight against the chill. Inside, children's laughter rang out, bright, unguarded, untouched by stock markets or scandals. The scent of simmering soup and old books drifted through the open door. This was her sanctuary, the place where she'd read stories to kids who'd never held a new book, where she'd seen hardened teenagers soften at the sound of someone saying, I believe in you. Marcus followed slowly, hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched like he expected stones to be thrown. He hadn't spoken since they left the penthouse. But his silence wasn't resistance, it was reverence. Inside, Ms. Delaney, the center's director, a woman with silver braids and eyes that had seen decades of struggle, greeted them with a knowing nod. Clara, and Mr. Whitmore. She didn't smile, but there was no judgment either, just quiet expectation. I'm here to help, Marcus said, voice rough. Whatever needs doing. Ms. Delaney studied him for a long moment, then pointed to a stack of soggy boxes near the back door. Roof's been leaking. Those are donations, books, clothes. They're getting wet. We need them moved to the dry storage room. And then mopped. Floor's a mess. He didn't hesitate. Show me. As he rolled up his sleeves, no watch, no cufflinks, just a man in a damp shirt. Clara watched, heart swelling. This wasn't performance. No cameras. No investors watching. Just humility, raw and unpolished. She joined him, lifting lighter boxes, their movements falling into an old rhythm they'd forgotten they shared. For hours they worked in near silence, hauling, sorting, scrubbing. At one point, a little boy named Jamal tugged Clara's sleeve. Miss Clara, is that your husband? She glanced at Marcus, on his knees wiping water off the floor with a rag, hair plastered to his forehead. Yes, she said softly. That's him. He looks sad, Jamal said. He's learning how to be brave, she replied. Later, as they took a break in the dim hallway, Marcus leaned against the wall, exhausted. I used to think service was something you funded, he murmured. Not something you did with your hands. Clara handed him a paper cup of weak tea. God doesn't care about your net worth, Marcus. He cares about your heart's posture. He looked at her, eyes glistening. What if my heart's still broken? Then let him hold it, she said. Even the pieces. Just then, Ms. Delaney approached, holding a tablet. There's news, she said gently. Rebecca Lynn just gave an interview to the Financial Chronicle. It's going live at midnight. Marcus froze. What did she say? She didn't accuse you of fraud, Ms. Delaney said. But she confirmed the projections were altered, said she tried to stop it, that she resigned in protest. Clara's breath caught. Is she safe? She's under whistleblower protection, Ms. Delaney replied. But Marcus, the board will call an emergency meeting Monday. Regulators are already circling. He closed his eyes. It's over. No, Clara said fiercely. It's just beginning. You have a choice now: hide or stand in the truth, even if it costs you everything. He looked around, at the worn walls, the children's drawings taped to bulletin boards, the shelf of well-loved books stamped with pages of hope. Then he turned to Ms. Delaney. "Will you let me speak at the morning assembly tomorrow before I go to Elias?" She raised an eyebrow. "About what? About failure," he said. "About pride. About how I thought success meant never needing anyone. Until I lost the one person who saw me when I was invisible." Ms. Delaney studied him, then nodded. 7 a.m. Don't be late. As they walked back to the car in the rain, Marcus stopped beneath a flickering street lamp. "I'm scared, Clara. Not of losing money, but of losing you. After tonight, after seeing what real love looks like here, I don't know how to go back to the way things were." She took his hand, cold, wet, trembling, and pressed it to her heart. "You won't have to, because I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you choose the lie over the truth again." He pulled her close, forehead resting against hers. Rain mixing with tears neither tried to hide. "I choose you," he whispered, "and I choose him, even if it ruins me." Inside the car, as the engine hummed to life, Clara's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Elias knows about Rebecca. He's waiting. Monday, 7 a.m. Don't be late." She didn't show it to Marcus. Not yet, because some truths needed to be faced alone first. And as the car drove away from the only place that had ever felt like home, Clara prayed. Not for rescue, but for courage. Inside, the morning assembly had already begun. 20 pairs of wide eyes fixed on Ms. Delaney as she read from a worn copy of The Giving Tree. But when Marcus stepped through the doorway, silence fell like a held breath. He didn't wear a suit, just dark jeans, a simple sweater Clara had bought him years ago, before the fame, before the distance. And his hands were still raw from last night's scrubbing. Clara lingered near the back, heart hammering. She'd seen him charm crowds, command boardrooms, dazzle investors with a single smirk. But this was different. This was surrender. He cleared his throat, voice unsteady. "My name is Marcus Whitmore, and I'm here because I failed." A little girl in the front row tilted her head. "Failed at what?" "At being honest," he said, kneeling so he was at their level. "I built a big company. People said I was smart, successful. But I started believing my own lies, that I didn't need anyone, that winning was everything. And in doing that, I hurt people. I hurt my wife. I hurt trust." He glanced at Clara. Her eyes shimmered, but she gave him the smallest nod. "I thought success meant never falling," he continued, voice thickening. "But real strength, it's getting back up and saying, I was wrong." He looked around at the children. Some curious, some skeptical, one boy chewing on a pencil. "You all know what it's like to be let down, maybe by someone who promised to stay and didn't. I want you to know, people can change, not because they're perfect, but because they choose every day to try again." A pause. Then Jamal raised his hand. "Did you say sorry?" Marcus swallowed. "I'm saying it now. To her." He pointed to Clara. "And to anyone I ever made feel small because I was too proud to see them." Clara's breath caught. This wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't strategic. It was raw, trembling truth. And in that moment, she saw the man she'd fallen in love with, buried beneath years of armor, finally stepping into the light. Ms. Delaney stood, eyes soft. "Thank you, Marcus." As the children returned to their activities, some drawing, others whispering about the rich man who cried, Marcus walked to Clara, hands shaking. "I don't know if it's enough," he whispered. "It's a start," she said, squeezing his hand. "And starts are sacred." They left the center just as the city began to wake in earnest, traffic humming to life, skies clearing to pale gold. But their peace was short-lived. At the curb, a black town car idled. Windows tinted, engine quiet. The door opened. Elias Thorne stepped out. He wore no suit jacket, just a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. In his hand, a single manila envelope. "You spoke to them," Elias said, not as an accusation, but as an acknowledgement. "I had to," Marcus replied, "before I faced you." Elias nodded slowly. Rebecca Lynn's testimony went public an hour ago. The SEC has opened a preliminary inquiry. Your board is in emergency session as we speak. Marcus flinched but didn't look away. I know. Most men in your position would be hiding, Elias said. Or spinning. Or running. I'm done running, Marcus said. I came here to serve. Not to save my company. To save my soul. Elias studied him for a long moment, then handed him the envelope. Open it. Marcus did. Inside was not a contract, not a check, but a printed email chain between Rebecca Lynn and a senior Whitmore Dynamics executive, dated weeks before the Singapore deal closed. In it, she'd flagged the inflated projections, and Marcus had replied, adjust the narrative. We need this to close. Clara's stomach dropped. You knew. I suspected, Elias said quietly. But I needed to see if you'd own it. Marcus's hands trembled. I did this. I chose the lie. Yes, Elias said. But today you chose truth. That matters more than you know. He turned to Clara. Your program is safe. Funding is already in motion, fully independent as promised. No ties to Whitmore Dynamics. Then he looked back at Marcus. As for you, I won't invest in your company. Not yet. But I will stand with you, if you agree to one thing. Anything, Marcus said. Full transparency. Public statement by noon. Admit the misrepresentation. Accept the consequences. And commit to rebuilding. Not just your business, but your character. With integrity as your foundation. Marcus closed his eyes. My investors will abandon me. My name will be ruined. Or, Elias said gently, you'll become the man your wife never stopped believing you could be. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant wail of a siren, the rustle of wind through bare trees. Then Marcus looked at Clara. What do you think? She stepped forward, tears in her eyes but fire in her voice. I think God doesn't waste broken things, Marcus. He redeems them. He took a deep breath. Noted. I'll do it. Elias extended his hand, not for a deal but for a covenant. Then let's walk into the fire together. As they turned toward the car, Clara's phone buzzed. A news alert: Whitmore Dynamics CEO to address Singapore deal controversy. Live at noon. Clara sat beside Marcus, her fingers laced with his. His palm was damp, his knuckles white. He hadn't spoken since they left Camden, but his eyes, once sharp with calculation, now held a strange, quiet clarity, like a man who'd finally stopped running from his own reflection. Elias sat across from them, gazing out the window, his presence calm as deep water. He hadn't offered reassurance, hadn't promised outcomes. He simply was, a steady anchor in the gathering tempest. When they arrived at the Whitmore Dynamics headquarters, the plaza was already swarming. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions before they'd even stepped onto the curb. There he is. Marcus, did you falsify reports? Is the company collapsing? Mrs. Whitmore, why are you standing with him? Clara flinched, but Marcus squeezed her hand tighter. Stay close, he murmured. Don't let go. I won't, she whispered back. They entered through the private elevator. No grand lobby, no fanfare. Just steel walls and the hum of machinery. On the top floor, his office overlooked the entire skyline, once a symbol of his dominion. Now it felt like a confessional. Elias turned to him. You don't have to do this alone. I do, Marcus said. This is my mess. My confession. But you don't have to carry it alone afterward, Clara said softly. That's what grace is for. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, she saw not fear in his eyes, but peace. I love you, he said, voice breaking, even if no one else does after today. I've always loved you, she replied, even when you forgot how to love yourself. At 11:55 a.m., they stepped onto the rooftop terrace where the press conference was set. A single podium stood beneath a gray sky, microphones clustered like vultures. The crowd below had grown. Investors, journalists, even former employees, faces a mix of anger, curiosity, and hope. Marcus walked to the podium alone. He adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and for a long moment, just stood there, breathing. Then he spoke. "My name is Marcus Whitmore," he began, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "And I am here today not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, but as a man who failed." A hush fell over the crowd. 2 months ago, I knowingly allowed financial projections for the Singapore acquisition to be misrepresented. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd fix it before anyone got hurt. But the truth is, I hurt people. I betrayed the trust of my investors, my employees, and most deeply, my wife. He glanced at Clara, standing just off stage, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "I thought success meant never showing weakness," he continued. "But real strength is found in humility, in saying, 'I was wrong,' and in making things right, even when it costs everything." He took a deep breath. "Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of Whitmore Dynamics. I will cooperate fully with regulators. I will liquidate personal assets to cover losses where possible. And I will spend the coming months not rebuilding my empire, but rebuilding my integrity." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed like lightning. Then, from the back, a voice called out, "Is this a PR stunt?" Marcus didn't flinch. "If it were, I'd be hiring lawyers, not scrubbing floors in Camden. Last night, I served soup to children who've never known stability. And in their eyes, I saw what I'd lost, the belief that people matter more than profit." He paused, voice thickening. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope, in time, my actions will speak louder than my apologies." As he stepped back, the crowd erupted, some shouting, some applauding, many just staring in stunned silence. But then, something unexpected happened. From the front row, an older woman in a faded Whitmore Dynamics vest stood up. She'd worked in customer service for 17 years. "I believe you," she said, voice clear and strong, "because I saw you last week, when you thought no one was watching, help that intern carry boxes after her car broke down. You didn't have to, but you did." Another voice joined hers. Then another. Soon, a quiet chorus rose, not of outrage, but of grace. Clara walked to Marcus, tears falling freely now. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he said, pulling her close. "We did." Elias approached, eyes glistening. "You just lost a fortune," he said quietly. "But you gained something far rarer." "What's that?" Marcus asked. "A clean conscience." As they descended in the elevator, the world outside already spinning with headlines and speculation, Marcus turned to Clara. "What now?" She smiled through tears. "Now we rebuild. Not a company, a life." And in that moment, as the doors opened to a city that would either crucify or crown him, Marcus Whitmore didn't look for exits. Clara watched him, heart aching with pride and sorrow tangled together. He just surrendered everything. His title, his control, his carefully curated legacy. And yet, in his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in years: peace. But peace, she knew, was never the end of the storm. Only the eye. As they stepped into the underground parking garage, Elias paused beside his car, keys in hand. "The board will move fast," he said quietly. "They'll appoint an interim CEO by sunset. Some will call you a hero, others a fool. But the real test begins now." Marcus nodded. "I know." "What will you do?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed, insistent, urgent. He pulled it out, frowned at the screen, then handed it to Clara. It was a message from his former CFO. "They're freezing your personal accounts. Pending investigation. You're locked out." Her stomach dropped. "Marcus, we don't even have access to our own money." He let out a dry, hollow laugh. "Guess I really did burn the bridge." Elias stepped closer. "You'll need a place to stay. My guest house in the hills is empty. No press, no cameras. Just quiet." Marcus shook his head. "I can't accept charity." "This isn't charity," Elias said firmly. "It's stewardship. You stood in truth today. That's rare. and it deserves protection. Clara touched Marcus's arm. We have no home now. Not really. The penthouse is company property. Our savings are frozen. Even our clothes. She trailed off, thinking of the simple suitcase she'd packed last night. Just a few dresses, her grandmother's Bible, the worn copy of the Little Prince Marcus had given her on their first anniversary. He looked at her, eyes full of regret. I'm sorry, Clara. I've left you with nothing. You've left me with you, she said softly. And that's everything. Elias opened the car door. Come, before the vultures circle. They drove in silence through the city, now alive with breaking news alerts flashing on digital billboards. Whitmore admits fraud. Steps down. Billionaire falls the truth behind the empire. Each headline felt like a stone tossed at their backs. But Clara kept her gaze forward, hand resting on Marcus's knee, anchoring him. When they reached the secluded estate in the hills, the sun was dipping below the trees, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds. The guest house was modest, stone walls, a porch swing, a garden overgrown with wildflowers. Nothing like the penthouse, but it felt real. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old books. A fire crackled in the hearth. Elias must have called ahead. Stay as long as you need, he said, handing Marcus a set of keys. And Marcus, don't disappear. The world needs to see you live what you confessed. After he left, Marcus stood in the center of the living room, lost. I don't even know how to be here, without meetings, without deals, without pretending. Clara walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, lit the stove. Then just be. She made tea chamomile, the kind he used to hate but now might need. As she set the cup before him, he finally looked at her, eyes raw. What if I fail again, he whispered. What if I'm not strong enough to stay honest when no one's watching? She knelt beside him, took his face in her hands. Then you'll fall, and I'll be there to help you up. Again and again. That's what covenant means, Marcus. Not perfection, presence. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you. Maybe not, she said gently, but you're stuck with me. Later that night, as rain began to patter on the roof, they sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching lightning flicker in the distance. I used to think love was grand gestures, he said quietly. Private jets, diamond necklaces, gala appearances. And now, she asked. Now I think love is this, he said, tightening his arm around her. Sitting in the quiet, knowing you're seen, even when you're broken. She rested her head on his shoulder. Then you finally learned it. But just as peace settled over them, his phone buzzed again, this time a call. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered on speaker. A woman's voice, calm but firm. Marcus Whitmore. Yes. This is Rebecca Lynn. His breath caught. Clara's hand found his instantly. I saw your statement, Rebecca continued, and I want you to know. I didn't speak out to destroy you. I spoke out because I believed you could be better. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Thank you, he finally said, voice thick, for giving me the chance to become that man. There was a pause. Then, softly, my father lost everything to pride. I prayed I wouldn't follow him. Today, I saw someone choose a different path. That gives me hope. The line went quiet. Marcus lowered the phone, tears in his eyes. She forgave me. No, Clara said, leaning into him. She saw you, and that's even better. As the storm rolled in, thunder rumbling like distant judgment, they sat together. Not as millionaire and wife, not as fallen CEO and loyal spouse, but as two souls, stripped bare, choosing each other in the wreckage. And in that humble guest house, with rain washing the world clean outside, something new began to grow. The guest house had become home, not because of its stone walls or wildflower garden, but because, for the first time in years, they were building something real inside it. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, evenings with shared silence and secondhand books from the local library. Marcus had started journaling. Pages filled not with strategies, but with confessions, prayers, and lists of people he'd wronged and needed to make amends to. But peace, Clara was learning, wasn't the absence of pain. It was the presence of purpose in the midst of it. One gray Tuesday, as rain tapped gently on the roof, Clara sat at the kitchen table, reviewing grant reports for Pages of Hope. The program was thriving, Elias's funding had arrived swiftly, and enrollment had doubled. Yet her heart was heavy. Marcus entered, carrying firewood. His sleeves rolled up, hands rough from chopping wood and fixing the porch steps. He'd lost weight, not from stress, but from labor, real, honest work that left him tired but clear-eyed. "You're quiet," he said, setting the wood by the hearth. She looked up, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." "About what?" She hesitated, then pushed a letter across the table. It was from the church elders. Her mentor, Pastor Lydia, had written it. "Clara, your heart is tender, and your faith strong. But remember, forgiveness is not the same as restoration. God calls us to release bitterness, yes, but He also gives wisdom to discern when a covenant needs time, space, and proof of change before full reconciliation. Don't confuse loyalty with self-abandonment." Marcus read it slowly. When he looked up, his eyes were full of pain. Not anger, but sorrow. "She thinks I'll hurt you again," he said quietly. "She thinks I might forget how much it hurt the first time," Clara replied, voice trembling. "And maybe she's right." He sank into the chair across from her, elbows on the table, head bowed. "I don't blame her. I don't even blame you if you walk away now. After everything. After I left you invisible, after I lied, after I made you choose between your integrity and your marriage. I'm not walking away," she said firmly. "But I'm also not pretending the past didn't happen." He looked at her, searching. "Then what are we doing, Clara? Are we rebuilding? Or just waiting for the next collapse?" She stood, walked to the window, watching rain slide down the glass like tears. "I've been praying every morning," she said softly. "Not just for you, but for me. Asking God to show me if I'm staying out of love or out of fear of being alone." He was silent for a long moment. Then, "And what has He shown you?" "That love isn't blind," she said, turning to face him. "It sees the wounds and stays anyway, but it also sets boundaries. It demands truth. It requires action, not just words." He nodded slowly. "So what do you need from me?" "Not perfection," she said, stepping closer, "but consistency. Show me, day after day, that the man who stood on that rooftop wasn't just having a moment, but is becoming a new creation." He reached for her hand. "I will, however long it takes." But before she could respond, her phone rang. It was Ms. Delaney from the Camden Center. Clara answered, heart skipping. "Hello, Clara, it's Rebecca Lynn," Ms. Delaney said, voice urgent. "She's here, in person. Says she needs to speak with you, and Marcus." Clara's breath caught. "Is she safe?" "She says she's done hiding. And she brought something." Marcus stood, eyes wide. "What is it?" Clara lowered the phone, voice hushed. "She has the original internal audit, the one that proves you tried to correct the projections after the initial misstep. But your CFO overruled you and backdated the files." His face went pale. "That report was deleted. I thought it was gone." "Maybe," Clara said, hope flickering like a candle in the wind. "God kept it for a reason." They drove to Camden in silence, the rain now a steady drumbeat against the windshield. Every mile felt charged with possibility and peril, because if Rebecca's evidence exonerated Marcus, the world would call him a victim. But if it only complicated the truth, it might muddy the very clarity he'd fought so hard to claim. When they arrived, Rebecca stood in the community center hallway, no longer the polished executive, but a woman in simple clothes, eyes weary but resolute. "I didn't come to clear your name," she said before Marcus could speak. "I came to honor the truth, all of it." She handed him a flash drive. "The full timeline. You did try to fix it, but you didn't go public. You didn't blow the whistle. You stayed silent to protect the deal." Marcus swallowed hard. "I was afraid." "I know," she said gently. "But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite it." She turned to Clara. "And you You stood by him even when he didn't deserve it. That's not weakness. That's covenant. Then, quietly, I'm starting a nonprofit for ethical reform in corporate governance. I'd like you both to be part of it, not as symbols but as witnesses. Marcus looked at Clara, then back at Rebecca. Why? Because the world doesn't need more perfect people, Rebecca said, a faint smile touching her lips. It needs redeemed ones. As they left the center that evening, the rain had stopped. A sliver of moon broke through the clouds, casting silver light over the wet streets. Clara squeezed Marcus's hand. This changes everything. No, he said softly. It doesn't, because even if the world forgives me tomorrow, I still I'll confession. There would be no loopholes, no clever defenses, only honesty offered like an open palm. But while Marcus wrestled with accountability, Clara faced a quieter storm, one that raged not in boardrooms or headlines, but in the chambers of her own heart. One afternoon, as golden autumn light spilled through the guest house windows, she sat on the porch with Pastor Lydia, who'd driven up from the city unannounced, her silver hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat, eyes sharp with love and concern. "You look tired, child," Lydia said, handing Clara a steaming mug of herbal tea. Clara wrapped her hands around it, the warmth seeping into her bones. "I'm not sleeping." "Because of him," Lydia asked gently. "Because of me?" Clara admitted, voice trembling. "I keep asking God, am I staying because I believe in redemption, or because I'm afraid to start over?" She looked out at the hills, leaves rustling like whispered prayers. "What if I'm just clinging to a dream of who he could be?" While ignoring who he still is, Lydia was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn journal, Clara's own, from years ago, filled with prayers she'd written during the loneliest seasons of her marriage. "I kept this," Lydia said softly. "You gave it to me after your third miscarriage. Remember, you wrote, 'God, if this marriage is yours, fight for it. If it's not, set me free.'" Tears filled Clara's eyes. She had written that, in the dead of night, after Marcus had fallen asleep mid-sentence. Again, Lydia opened to a page near the end. "And here, 6 months ago, I feel invisible, but I trust you see me. Use my waiting, even if it breaks me." Clara covered her face. "I didn't think anyone would ever read those." "God did," Lydia said, "and he's answering, not with a miracle that erases the pain, but with a man who's finally learning to see you." Before Clara could respond, the screen door creaked open. Marcus stood there, holding a basket of firewood, his expression softening as he saw them. "Pastor Lydia, I didn't know you were coming." "I came to check on her," Lydia said, nodding to Clara. "Not you." He didn't bristle, just set the wood down and sat on the porch step, a respectful distance away. "Fair enough." Lydia studied him, the calluses on his hands, the humility in his posture, the absence of the polished armor he once wore like a second skin. "You've changed," she said finally. "I'm trying," he replied. "But change isn't a destination. It's a daily choice." "And today," she asked, "what choice did you make?" He looked at Clara. "I chose to listen. She's been quiet lately." I asked why. She didn't answer, so I waited, and I prayed. Clara's breath caught. He had asked, and when she'd stayed silent, he hadn't pushed, hadn't demanded, had just stayed. Lydia stood, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Redemption isn't a feeling, child. It's a path walked together, one honest step at a time." She turned to Marcus. "Don't waste her courage. It's a rare and holy thing." After she left, the silence between them was different, lighter, charged with unspoken understanding. Marcus finally spoke. "If you need to leave, to find yourself outside of us, I'll understand." Clara looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man who once ignored her at a gala, but the one who now noticed when she stirred her tea 3 times instead of 2. "I don't need to leave to find myself," she said softly. "I found myself in the leaving, when I chose to stay not out of fear, but faith." He stood, walked to her, knelt on the worn porch boards. "Then let me prove, every day, that your faith wasn't misplaced. She touched his cheek, rough with stubble, eyes glistening. It already has been. Just then, his phone buzzed on the railing. A message from Elias. SEC closed the inquiry. No criminal charges. Civil penalties apply, but your cooperation and full disclosure mitigated the outcome. You're free to rebuild. On your terms. Marcus read it aloud, voice shaking. It's over. No, Clara said, taking his hand. It's just beginning. And as the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows that slowly gave way to stars, they sat together on the porch. Not as the millionaire and his forgotten wife, not as the fallen and the faithful, but as two souls scarred but standing, choosing each other again in the but peace they were learning was never static. It was a living thing, constantly tested, constantly chosen. One brittle morning, as ice glazed the porch rails and smoke curled from the chimney, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, staring at a letter that had arrived by certified mail. His hands were steady, but his breath came shallow. Clara entered, carrying firewood, cheeks pink from the cold. She saw the envelope, the Whitmore Dynamics logo embossed in silver, and froze. "They're selling the company," he said quietly, not looking up, "to a private equity firm. Asset strip. Layoffs start next month." She set the wood down slowly. "What about Pages of Hope, the community programs?" "Gone," he said, voice hollow. "Unless someone buys the non-profit arm separately." He finally looked at her, eyes raw. "I don't have the money, Clara. Not even close." She sat across from him, heart pounding. This wasn't just business, it was legacy. The children who'd learned to read, the families fed, the hope planted in broken soil, all of it hanging by a thread. "What if we ask Elias?" she ventured. Marcus shook his head. "He's already done too much. And this is my mess to clean." "Then we clean it together," she said firmly. "But Marcus, we can't do it from here. We need to go back. To the city. To fight for what matters." He flinched. "After everything, they'll see me as a ghost. A cautionary tale. Or," she said, leaning forward, eyes blazing, "they'll see a man who lost everything and chose to rebuild with his hands, not his wallet." He was silent for a long time, watching steam rise from his untouched coffee. Then softly, "I'm scared I'll fall back into the old ways. The pressure, the noise. It changes people." "It changed you once," she admitted. "But you're not that man anymore. And I'll be right beside you. Not to fix you, but to remind you who you are when the world tries to rename you." That evening, as snow began to fall in slow, silent spirals, Marcus made a call. Not to a lawyer, not to a broker, but to Rebecca Lynn. "I want to bid on the nonprofit division," he said when she answered. "But I have no capital. Only a plan and a promise." Rebecca listened. "Then meet me tomorrow, at the old office. 7 a.m. Bring Clara." The next morning, the city loomed like a memory made of steel and glass. Whitmore Dynamics headquarters stood unchanged. Same grand lobby, same security guards, but everything inside felt different. Smaller, hollow. Rebecca met them in Marcus's former office, now stripped bare except for a single desk and 2 chairs. She handed them a folder. "The board approved a 30-day window for internal bids on the nonprofit assets," she said. "But there's a catch. You need $2.5 million in escrow by Friday to qualify." Marcus paled. "That's impossible." "Not if you're willing to be vulnerable," Rebecca said gently. "Elias won't fund it directly. He believes you need to earn it. But he's agreed to host a private gathering Thursday night. Investors, philanthropists, people who care about impact, not optics. You'll have 10 minutes to pitch your vision. For Pages of Hope, for ethical renewal, for redemption that serves." Clara's pulse raced. 10 minutes to convince strangers to trust a fallen man. "No," Rebecca said, meeting Marcus's eyes. 10 minutes to show them that failure isn't the end. It's the beginning of something truer. That night, back in their rented apartment in the city, the guest house too far now, Clara found Marcus standing on the balcony, snow dusting his shoulders, staring at the skyline he'd once ruled. "I don't know how to do this," he murmured. I used to sell dreams wrapped in data. Now, I have nothing but a broken story. She stepped beside him, slipping her hand into his. Then tell the truth, not as a CEO, as a man who learned that love is service, and success is stewardship. He turned to her, snowflakes catching in his lashes. What if they laugh? Then let them, she said. But I'll be in the front row, proud of the man who scrubbed floors in Camden so he could stand clean before God. He pulled her close, forehead resting against hers. I don't deserve this second chance. Maybe not, she whispered. But grace isn't earned. It's received, and then lived. Thursday night arrived with a tension thick enough to taste. The gathering was held in a modest hall. No chandeliers, no champagne towers. Just warm light, simple chairs, and faces marked by wisdom, not wealth. Marcus stood at the podium, heart hammering. Clara sat in the third row, hands folded in prayer. He took a breath and spoke, not with polish but with passion. I'm not here to rebuild an empire, he began, voice rough with emotion. I'm here to protect a promise. To children who believe a book can change their life. To communities that taught me humility is the highest form of strength. I failed. Publicly. Painfully. But in that failure, I found something I'd lost my soul. He glanced at Clara. And I found her again. The woman who never stopped believing I could be more than my worst choices. He laid out the plan: sustainable funding, community-led leadership, partnerships with churches and schools. No jargon. No hype, just vision rooted in repentance and hope. When he finished, silence filled the room. Then, from the back, Elias stood. I'll match every dollar pledged tonight, he said simply, because I've seen this man serve when no one was watching. And that's the only metric that matters. One by one, hands rose. Checks were written. Promises made. By midnight, they had $3.1 million. As they walked out into the snow-dusted street, Marcus stopped beneath a street lamp, tears freezing on his cheeks. We did it, he whispered. No, Clara said, smiling through her own tears. You did it, by choosing truth over image, service over status. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. And in that quiet embrace, beneath a sky full of stars, they knew. The real test wasn't settled in her chest, heavier than the winter air outside. Marcus had been different since the pitch, lighter, yes, but also distant. Not cold, not absent, but preoccupied, as if the weight of responsibility had shifted from shame to stewardship, and he wasn't sure he could carry it without stumbling. One evening, as snow fell in soft, relentless waves, Elias called. I've arranged a meeting with the board of the Global Education Initiative, he said, voice calm but urgent. They're prepared to fund a nationwide rollout of your literacy model, if you agree to a strategic partnership. But there's a condition. Clara's breath caught. What is it? They want Marcus as the public face. Not just as co-founder, but as spokesperson. They believe his story, his fall and return, will inspire donors, schools, even lawmakers. But Clara, Elias paused. They also want you to step back from day-to-day operations. They say your role lacks scalability, and that Marcus's leadership carries more market credibility. The words landed like shards of glass. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quietly, they want to erase me. No, Elias said gently. They want to streamline, but I told them if Clara isn't at the heart of this, there is no heart. Still, the offer hung in the air. A golden door, wide open, leading to impact beyond their wildest dreams, at the cost of her voice, her vision, her identity. That night, she found Marcus on the balcony again, staring into the snow-blanketed city, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. They called you too, didn't they? She asked, stepping beside him. He didn't look at her. Yes. And what did you say? I said I wouldn't accept it without you. His voice was firm, but his shoulders were tense. But Clara, this could change everything. We could reach thousands more kids. Build libraries in every underserved district. This is what you've prayed for. She turned to face him, snowflakes catching in her hair. At what cost, Marcus, if they silence me to amplify you? Aren't we just repeating the same pattern, you in the spotlight, me in the shadow? He flinched. That's not what this is. Isn't it? Her voice broke. You stood on that stage and said I was the reason you found your soul. But now, when it matters most, they want to push me aside. And you're considering it. I'm not, he said, turning to her, eyes blazing. I told them no. Flat. But Clara, what if we're being prideful? What if God is asking us to lay down our egos for the sake of the mission? She looked at him, really looked, and saw not manipulation but genuine torment. He wasn't choosing fame. He was torn between love and legacy. I'm not asking for credit, she whispered. I'm asking for partnership. If this work is truly ours, then it must carry both our names, not just yours polished for public consumption. He ran a hand through his hair, breath fogging in the cold. Then we walk away, or we rewrite the terms, she said firmly. Together, we tell them Clara Whitmore leads curriculum and community engagement. Marcus Whitmore handles outreach and funding. Equal roles, equal voice, or no deal. He stared at her, searching her face. They'll say no. Then let them, she said. Because if the price of expansion is my erasure, it's not expansion, it's betrayal. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft hush of falling snow. Then, slowly, Marcus reached for her hand. You're right. I was so afraid of losing this chance that I almost lost you again. He pulled her close, his voice thick with emotion. I don't want a legacy built on your silence. I want one built on our unity. The next morning, they met Elias at a quiet cafe, steam rising from mugs of black coffee. We have a counteroffer, Marcus said, placing a single sheet of paper on the table. Elias read it, eyebrows lifting. Then he smiled, a rare, full smile. You're asking for shared leadership, transparent credit, and Clara as co-CEO of the initiative. Yes, Clara said, because the heart of this work isn't redemption for one man. It's restoration for many. And that includes women like me who've been told to stay quiet while others speak for them. Elias leaned back, thoughtful. They may walk away. Then they weren't the right partners, Marcus said firmly. 2 days later, the board responded. Not with rejection, but with awe. Your integrity is precisely why we want to partner with you, their letter read. We accept your terms. Led together. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder. You chose me, she whispered. Heiress in community centers, his name no longer a brand, but a bridge. Yet even in this season of blossoming, shadows lingered. One rain-slicked afternoon, as Clara sorted mail at their modest office, a converted bookstore downtown, she found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It was from the gala the night everything changed. Her and Elias, standing on the terrace, heads close in conversation. The city lights blurred behind them. Someone had circled Elias's hand near hers with red ink. Beneath it, a note in neat, unfamiliar script. He sees you. Your husband never did. Are you sure you're choosing the right man? Her breath caught. The paper trembled in her hands. She hadn't spoken to Elias alone since the funding was secured. Their interactions were professional, respectful, always in the presence of others. He'd been careful, painfully so, to honor boundaries, to protect both her marriage and her mission. But someone had twisted that integrity into suspicion. Before she could decide what to do, Marcus walked in, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. The oat milk latte she loved, just the way she liked it. You're pale, he said, setting the cup before her. What's wrong? She hesitated, then handed him the photo. He studied it, jaw tightening. But instead of anger, she saw sorrow in his eyes. Do you think I don't trust you? He asked quietly. It's not about trust, she said, voice trembling. It's about fear. Someone's trying to poison what we've rebuilt. He sat across from her, elbows on the worn wooden desk, hands clasped like he was praying. I used to be that man, the one who saw threat in every kindness shown to you. But Camden changed me. Elias didn't take you from me, Clara. He reminded me I'd already let you go. She looked at him, tears welling. What if this ruins us again? It won't, he said firmly. Because we're not the same people we were at that gala. You didn't need Elias to see your worth. You needed to remember it yourself. And I needed to stop loving my image more than I loved you. He reached across the desk, took her hand. Let's not let fear write our story. Let's write it together, with truth as our compass. That evening, they drove to Elias's office, not to accuse, but to stand together. Elias listened in silence as Clara showed him the note. When she finished, he didn't flinch, didn't defend himself, just nodded slowly. This isn't about me, he said. It's about someone who profits from division. Probably a former Whitmore investor who lost money in the restructuring. They want you fractured because a united front threatens their narrative. Marcus exhaled. What do we do? Nothing, Elias said. Don't respond. Don't explain. The moment you justify your marriage to strangers, you give them power over it. He looked at Clara. You know the truth. He knows the truth. And God knows the truth. That's enough. As they left his building, the city hummed with evening life. Buses rumbling, street musicians playing, couples laughing under awnings. But Clara felt a strange peace. Later that night, as they sat on their tiny balcony overlooking a courtyard of blooming cherry trees, Marcus turned to her. I've been thinking, he said softly, about vows. She smiled. We've already said them once. Not like this, he said. Not after everything. I want to renew them. Not in a cathedral. Not for an audience. Just us. And God. Her breath caught. Where, Camden, he said. At the community center. Where I first learned how to see you. Tears filled her eyes. Yes. But as they planned the quiet ceremony, just Pastor Lydia, Ms. Delaney, Rebecca, and a few of the kids from Pages of Hope, a new message arrived. Not anonymous this time. It was from Marcus's estranged father. Heard you're playing Saint now. Don't insult me. Power is the only truth. You'll be back. Marcus read it aloud, voice steady, but his hands shook. Clara took the phone, deleted the message, then wrapped her arms around him. He's wrong, she whispered. You're not going back, because you've finally found something worth more than power. He buried his face in her hair. What's that? Love that stays, she said. Even when it's hard, even when it's quiet, even when no one's watching. And in that moment, beneath the pink petals drifting like blessings from the sky, they knew. The real victory wasn't in silencing the critics. It was in C. Rose's bakery down the block. The community center had been transformed not with roses or ribbons, but with handmade paper flowers crafted by the children Clara taught. Each petal inscribed with the word hope, truth, grace, together. Clara stood in the small back room, smoothing the simple ivory dress she'd chosen. Not for grandeur, but for meaning. It was the same shade as the pages of the first book she'd ever given to a child at this very center. She didn't wear a veil, just her grandmother's locket, warm against her chest, holding a tiny slip of paper with Isaiah 4:31. I have called you by name, you are mine. A knock came at the door. Come in, she said softly. Marcus stepped inside and stopped. He wore no tuxedo, just a navy suit, slightly worn at the cuffs, the one he'd bought after selling his designer wardrobe to help fund the nonprofit's first expansion. His hair was neatly combed, but his eyes held a reverence she'd never seen before. You look like Grace, he whispered. She smiled through tears. So do you. He walked to her, hands trembling slightly. I keep thinking, what if I fail again, what if I forget, in some quiet moment, to see you? She took his hands. Then I'll remind you, like you've reminded me that I'm more than what I produce, that I'm beloved, simply because I exist. He swallowed hard. I used to think love was something I gave when I had extra. Now I know. It's something I choose, even when I'm empty. Outside, Pastor Lydia rang a small bell, the signal that it was time. As they stepped into the sunlit courtyard, the gathered crowd rose, not out of obligation, but out of witness. Ms. Delaney wiped her eyes. Rebecca stood tall, arms crossed, but her smile was tender. And there, near the back, stood Elias. Hands in his pockets, expression quiet, respectful, proud. No cameras, no press, just truth offered in the open air. Pastor Lydia opened her Bible. Marriage is not a contract of perfection, she began, voice steady and warm, but a covenant of grace. Two people choosing, daily, to walk toward each other, even when the path is steep. She turned to Marcus. Do you, Marcus, take Clara? Not as a symbol, not as an accessory, but as your equal, your partner, your beloved. To honor her voice, protect her dreams, and see her fully, even when it costs you your pride. I do, he said, voice thick. Not because I'm worthy, but because she's shown me what love really looks like. Then to Clara, and do you, Clara, take Marcus? Not as a project to fix, not as a name to carry, but as a man being remade, choosing to walk with him through failure and faith, trusting that redemption is a journey, not a destination. I do, she said, tears falling freely now. Because I've seen the man beneath the mask, and he's worth every step. They exchanged rings, simple bands, engraved only with a single word each, remember. And then, as the children began to sing a hymn they'd practiced for weeks, Great is thy faithfulness. Marcus pulled Clara close. I don't need a gala, he murmured against her hair. I just need you. But just as the final note faded, a car pulled up to the curb. Not a sleek town car, not a news van, an old sedan, dusty from travel. The door opened. Out stepped Marcus's father. Tall, stern, still dressed in the tailored coat of a man who ruled boardrooms, but his face older, thinner, weary. Silence fell like snow. Marcus stiffened. Clara squeezed his hand. His father walked slowly toward them, eyes fixed not on the crowd, but on his son. I heard you were doing this, he said, voice rough, renewing vows, like some penitent. Marcus met his gaze, like a man who finally learned what matters. His father looked around, at the children, the handmade decorations, the humble courtyard. Then his eyes landed on Clara. You changed him, he said, not kindly, but not cruelly either. No one else could. I didn't change him, Clara said gently. God did. I just stayed. The old man was silent for a long moment. Then, to everyone's shock, he reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. My lawyer finalized the transfer this morning, he said, handing it to Marcus. The Whitmore Foundation's remaining assets, $12 million. It's yours, to do with what you will. Marcus stared at it, stunned. Why, his father's jaw worked. Because for 50 years I thought strength was control. But watching you lose everything, and gain this. He gestured to the courtyard, to Clara, to the children watching wide-eyed. Maybe I was wrong. He turned to leave. Wait, Marcus called out. His father paused. Stay, Marcus said. For lunch. The kids made sandwiches. The old man hesitated, then almost imperceptibly nodded, as he sat on a folding chair beside Miss Delaney, who offered him a paper plate without a word. The sun broke through the clouds, bathing the courtyard in gold. Later, as they ate under the cherry trees, Marcus leaned close to Clara. I never thought I'd see him here, he whispered. Grace surprises us, she said, smiling, even when we don't deserve it. And in that ordinary moment, paper plates, laughter, a broken man eating a peanut butter sandwich beside the woman who never gave up on his son. Clara knew. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a legacy built not on wealth, but on witness. One rainy Tuesday, as Clara sorted donation letters at the kitchen table, Marcus came home earlier than usual. His coat was damp, his shoulders slumped, not with defeat, but with a quiet weight she recognized. He didn't speak at first, just poured 2 mugs of tea, the chamomile she loved, and sat across from her. You're thinking about him, she said softly. His father had stayed in the city after the vow renewal, renting a small apartment downtown. He'd begun attending the men's Bible study at Grace Chapel, the same one Marcus had abandoned years ago. They'd shared coffee twice, spoken little, But the silence between them was no longer hostile, just tender. "He called me this morning," Marcus said, staring into his mug. "Said he's been diagnosed with early-stage dementia." Clara's breath caught. "Oh, Marcus? He doesn't want pity," Marcus continued, voice rough. "He wants to make things right, while he still can." He looked up, eyes glistening. "He asked if I'd help him write letters to people he wronged. Former partners, employees he fired without cause, my mother's family, whom he shut out after she died." She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. "And what did you say?" "I said yes," he whispered. "But Clara, I'm terrified. What if I'm not enough? What if I fail him the way he failed me?" She stood, walked around the table, and knelt beside his chair, just as she had on that first night in the guest house, when everything was broken and hope was a fragile ember. "You don't have to be enough," she said, cupping his face. "You just have to be present." That's what he gave you in the end, a chance to show up. Not as the perfect son, just as his son. He leaned into her touch, tears spilling silently. "I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting, but it's not. It's remembering, and choosing love anyway." The next week, they began the work. In his father's dimly lit apartment, surrounded by old ledgers and faded photographs, Marcus sat beside the man who once taught him that vulnerability was weakness. Now, with trembling hands, the elder Whitmore dictated apologies. Raw, unpolished, achingly human. "Dear Eleanor, I fired you because you challenged me, but you were right. I'm sorry, I valued control more than truth. To the Jenkins family, I cut your funding because your project wasn't profitable. But compassion isn't measured in ROI. Please forgive my blindness." Marcus typed each one, his own heart breaking and mending with every sentence. One evening, as rain tapped against the window, his father paused, staring out at the city lights. "You know," he said quietly, "I thought I was building a legacy. Turned out, I was just building walls." Marcus looked at him, really looked, and saw not the titan of industry, but an old man afraid of being forgotten. "You're not forgotten," Marcus said, "and your legacy isn't gone. It's being rewritten with grace." His father turned, eyes wet. "You turned out better than I deserved." "No," Marcus said, voice thick. "I turned out because someone, Clara, God, even you in your own broken way, never stopped believing I could." Later, as they walked home through the rain, Clara tucked under his arm, Marcus stopped beneath a street lamp. "I asked him today if he'd walk me down the aisle," he said suddenly. She blinked. "What aisle?" He smiled, a real, full smile. "Ours. Again. Properly. At the church. With everyone. Not because we need to prove anything, but because I want the world to see what redemption looks like." Her breath caught. "You want your father to give you away." "I want him to receive me," Marcus corrected gently. "Not as his heir, but as his son." Tears filled her eyes. Then yes, 1,000 times yes. But as they neared their house, his phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca. "SEC just closed the final review. All civil penalties satisfied. You're officially clear, personally and professionally. You're free, Marcus." He read it aloud, voice trembling. Clara squeezed his hand. "Not just free, whole." And in that moment, beneath the soft glow of the street lamp, rain falling like benediction around them, Marcus Whitmore didn't feel like a billionaire, a CEO, or even a redeemed man, those who'd walked it beside them. Clara waited in the small side room, heart pounding like a drum beneath her simple lace gown. It wasn't new. She'd worn it once before, years ago, to a charity dinner Marcus had barely noticed her at. But today, every stitch felt sacred. She held a bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, lavender, cherry blossoms, gathered that morning by Jamal and Marisol, now teenagers with dreams as wide as the sky. Pastor Lydia entered, eyes soft with joy. "He's ready," she said. "And so is his father." Clara nodded, breath catching. She hadn't seen Marcus since last night, when they'd prayed together on their porch, whispering promises not to the world, but to God and to each other. Now, as the first notes of Amazing Grace rose from the small choir, the doors opened. And there he stood, not at the altar but at the back of the aisle, arm linked with his father. The elder Whitmore moved slowly, leaning lightly on a cane, but his posture was straight, his eyes clear. He wore a suit that looked decades old, perhaps the one he'd worn to his own wedding, and though his hands trembled, his grip on Marcus's arm was firm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers turned to silence. Because this wasn't just a groom walking down the aisle. This was a son being given, not as property but as a gift. As they neared, Clara saw tears in Marcus's eyes. Not of sorrow, but of awe. His father stopped just before her, released his son's arm and turned to her. For a long moment he simply looked at her, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. Then, voice rough but steady, "You saved him when I couldn't. Not by fixing him, but by loving him through the broken places." He took her hand, pressed it gently into Marcus's. "Take care of each other." And with that, he stepped aside, not to disappear, but to sit in the front pew, alone yet no longer lonely. Marcus turned to Clara, tears spilling freely now. "You're more beautiful than I remember," he whispered. "You're more present than I ever dreamed," she replied. They faced Pastor Lydia together. "Marriage," she began, voice trembling with emotion, "is not the union of two perfect people, but of two forgiven ones. Today, you don't renew vows because your love never faltered, but because it endured through the faltering. That is the miracle." She turned to Marcus. "Do you, Marcus, choose Clara? Not for what she gives you, but for who she is, her strength, her faith, her unwavering heart. Even when the world tries to convince you otherwise." "I do," he said, voice strong. "I choose her in the light and in the shadow, in success and in silence, because she taught me that love isn't performance, it's presence." Then to Clara, "And do you, Clara, choose Marcus? Not because he's perfect, but because he's willing to be remade, trusting that the man who once ignored you at a gala is now the one who sees you most clearly." "I do," she said, tears streaming. "I choose the man who scrubbed floors in Camden, who confessed his failures in front of strangers, who holds my hand even when he's afraid. Because that man is worth every tear, every prayer, every hope." They exchanged rings. Same simple bands, now worn smooth by months of honest living. Then, as the choir swelled into "It is well," Marcus cupped Clara's face. "I spent years building a life people envied," he whispered, loud enough only for her to hear. "But today, I finally have one I'm proud of, because you never stopped believing I could be worthy of it." She smiled through tears. "You were always worthy, Marcus. You just needed someone to."